Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. This is Manoj Tandon, your host, and today we are honored to have another brilliant guest join us. She is Wendy NG, Dr. Wendy NG, who is a brilliant scientist turned cybersecurity professional. To give you a little bit about her background, she's a consummate consultant. She's worked at Cisco, PwC, Deloitte. She is a principal cloud security architect, keynote speaker. She's been featured at Black Hat. She has led the team at Experian in DevSecOps and has really defined strategy for that organization, especially when it came to their DevSecOps transformation initiative. She is regularly a part of the community, has had many appearances, Black Hat most recently, and we are just honored to have her on the show. Dr. Wendy, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be part of the show.
No, thank you so much. We gotta start off with a very interesting thing. When you look back, we've had hundreds of guests on the show, and I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that 90% of them did not start life off in cybersecurity. They all arrived here some way or another. And you're a geneticist, an honest to God, real scientist. How do you go from that to IT, cybersecurity?
When I was going through school and university and, postgraduate, there weren't cybersecurity degrees.
Sure.
There were sort of, computer science, IT, sort of technology degrees, but that didn't exist. But I trained as in medical genetics at Oxford.
Wow.
Because the background in that is I came from quite a high achieving family. My father's a doctor, and so he was quite keen for me to do medicine. But honestly, I passed out at the sight of blood, and that was just not going to happen. So it's like next. So what can I do? I was quite geeky, anyways. I did medical genetics. Did genetics undergraduate and then did medical genetics. The issue is I don't wear much makeup because I have very sensitive skin. So when I was doing the lab work, I was doing it in hospital environment. Wow. And I had to do a lot of, in terms of the hygiene. I just got very bad eczema.
Wow.
And I just had to get out of the lab, basically. Yeah, it was not good. Initially, I was going to go into, something like along the bioinformatics field because my PhD was quite analytical anyway. So it's complex diseases. So there's a lot of, basically you need to generate a lot of data and you number crunch and you run statistics on it to see whether the results are significant or not. As luck hath it, I've joined instead. I joined Cisco as technical consulting, which suits me just fine because I'm sort of quite a geeky social person. And Cisco is networking, right? So when
yes.
I think coming from a different field and dramatically different field, I think opened my eyes to things a lot because even if you just if you just spend your sort of entire career in one field, sometimes it's sort of like there's sort of like kind of forces, I suppose, around you. But I came partly because I came from a different field. I thought, hang on, we're moving. Well, everything was connected by the time I sort of migrated over, and everything's designed with connectivity in mind, but not security. So going forward, that's going to be an interesting field. And I just felt like it was an area that, it was interesting because it was growing. It was a field that I can potentially contribute towards. And I think I just looked at the opportunity and sort of made a sideways step after my initial sideways step. So it's very, eclectic background.
Well, and do you think that did that not put you at a distinct advantage, actually, because you came from such a different field, yet you had all the analytical training and none of the preconceived notions of what infosec is
Yeah, that was. I think that was the word. Thank you. That was the word I was trying to look for. So I think it's. I think it does help to have people from different field, and I think in cybersecurity that's quite common anyway. I think nobody, certainly my generation above, did like cybersecurity as you
no.
know undergraduate or what have you. So I think that's an advantage, and I think that may be the reason why it's such a vibrant field. It's a combination of geekiness and creativity that's driving the whole ecosystem.
The only other place we see that in is medicine, because you look at the entrance to medical school, they come from there's a large diversity of background. The number of engineers that go into medical school is staggering, and it's perhaps there's something to be said for that, as opposed to just coming in from a pure computer science basis. So interesting.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think so. And in terms of, I do think our, I don't know. I don't know if we will ever get to retire, my generation. So if you look at how long your career path is, I think the ability to sort of change and sort of move into a different field that you're interested in, and I think that's the most important thing. You need to be passionate about your work. You need to be interested in your work for you to do well. I mean, that's my kind of personal feeling.
I think that statement right there is worth the price of admission, because that's very true for anyone listening, that if you don't have a passion for what you're doing, your chances of excelling at it are pretty zero to none.
Yeah.
Whereas if
Yeah.
you're passionate, much can be achieved.
Absolutely. And I think I'm under no illusion that I'm in a sort of in a very enviable position, that I actually enjoy my sort of trades and craft and my career. So it's in that vein, it's always good to sort of give back and share with the community and see how we can move everybody forward.
So let me ask you this: as a geneticist, someone who's worked with a lot of viruses and whatnot, are there any lessons that compare, like between containing a virus and containing a breach or limiting damage? Is there I'm just curious. It may be a really stupid question, but
No, not at all. And there are actually, and I actually wrote. I can't remember. I've been writing blogs since 2016, but I actually wrote a blog called herd immunity, right? And it is the concepts are similar. So it's herd immunity in the sense that you're not infecting everybody. So it's herd immunity in the sense of like what we do using vaccines. So you basically vaccinate, the people you can, which is what happened, in the pandemic. You vaccinate as many people as possible, and through that process of vaccination, you build up herd immunity, which slows down the rate of transmission of a virus in your population. And it's designed to, well, one of the things that it achieves is there are individuals within your organization within your population that can't elicit a good immune response. There might be in the
yeah,
chemo, or there might be other immunosuppressed due to other reasons. And you have the concept of herd immunity really protects that population. Now you can you can move that to sort of in IT space. I mean, like mainframes. Yeah. I don't know. It's quite difficult to protect those because, yeah.
wow,
So those are,
that's it.
yeah. So that's your sort of immunosuppressed. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but you just in terms of visibility, in terms of how do you protect those? So you just protect your sort of ecosystem, and basically wrap that around sort of not a physical layer, but a protective sheath, as it were, or layer. Um,
Interesting. That, I had never thought of it that way, but that's a very interesting concept. And it seems logically correct. That's how it would function.
I think yes. I mean, it, I think there are lots of, conceptually, there's a lot of similarities, in terms of, you know, biological viruses. You've got different variants. You've got computer viruses. You've got different variants.
Yes.
The mode of spread is probably quite similar. The other thing I think I think one thing that sort of attracted me and that was very useful is, in medical genetics, actually, you deal with data. There's a lot of data, and I think in security, there's also lots of data. You've got lots of
Lots of data.
logs. You've got,
Yeah.
It's like, how do you use tools to sort of filter out, what's genuinely a signal from, the noise, just from those sort of everyday sort of activities in your organization. And I think that is one thing that, as a geneticist, as a medical geneticist, as a researcher, that's you can like the analytical, the methods, the statistical methods, the algorithms are basically, they use the same, in both fields.
That's yeah, I mean, the math and stats are going to be very similar. You're still applying them to very large data sets. You're still looking for deviations in the same manners. It makes a lot of sense, and the thought processes are going to share quite a bit of overlap. That's very cool. I bet you our audience definitely would never have equated someone with a training in genetics to how there is a degree of similarity to cyber. You were recently speaking on low Earth orbit constellations in Saudi Arabia. So what is a low Earth orbit constellation for our listeners that don't know? And I believe this is referring to satellites, but is that essentially?
Yes, so it's satellites which are positioned. So most traditional satellites are geostationary or median orbit satellites. So they're positioned relatively high in the Earth's orbit.
Yep.
So I mean, they're great, like geostationary. So they basically stay in the same position, in the position high enough in orbit so that they stay in the same relative position on Earth. And they're fantastic for things like, satellite television, if your favorite sort of, television show or whatever. But those, because they're placed so high in the Earth's orbit, the latency, for the signal is too long for you to be able to use it for kind of more real time in speed
So
situations.
these are meant more for networking then.
So these, because they're positioned much lower in the Earth's orbit, you are able to the latency for signal transmission is much lower, so that you can actually effectively deploy those for low latency solutions and offerings. For example, the internet. And actually, even for kind of developed nation, so I'm based out of the UK. Even for developed nations like the UK, there are regions where they just don't have internet access, or they have very poor, unreliable, low speed internet access. So I think the having that satellite with that capability, effectively, the aim is to cover those, plus other use cases, like if you have people, if you're on a flight, if you're on the sea, difficult to reach locations. So it's
You're
just
bringing
it's just
internet everywhere. You
and
will always.
exactly everywhere. And honestly, I think the internet's probably the start. I think you can actually piggyback a lot more other sort of use cases on these satellites. So it's quite cool.
So how securing them? I would imagine that it's very difficult to, even the control rooms and whatnot would all be secured with physical security, layers of security. where where is the chink, if you will, in this armor
So
on
so I said this at Black Hat, so I think I'm allowed to say this. So I think with traditional, we actually have a bigger security problem than sort of more, because you're right, traditional sort of geostationary satellites is very physical. The physical security basically does, is really quite effective. The thing with low Earth orbit satellite is because the number of satellites, because the number of, you need ground stations. So the satellites, not just you need ground stations, you need to connect them to a local area network, connect them to wide area network. And you have these user terminals, which, send and receive signals from, between the satellite and your sort of your position. It takes a sort of like a sort of attack profile of Internet of Things, really.
okay.
Essentially, you have you have things that sort of, well, I mean, incidentally, I don't think the satellites are as 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 the most vulnerable one, because they're in the air, right? It's
Right.
they sort of spin around, because they don't because they're so low in the Earth orbit. They whisk around the sort of surface very quickly. So if you're an attack on the ground, to do brute force attack, it'll in very limited time.
You have a very limited time span in which you
Yeah,
could do that.
yeah. Before it whizzes past you. So before that particular satellite whizzes past you. And at the moment, I don't think anyone's gonna, people generally not flying over that
No, they're
of
not
it. And
flying
it's
to
like,
those.
so
Not yet.
no, not yet, not yet. They made it. So the most vulnerable parts is probably the sort of areas where, as an organization, you have least amount of control and you have the most amount of kit. You probably can guess where those are. So it's
Yeah,
So the
it seems like that would be similar to what we see. We as an organization do a lot of work in the infrastructure space. And for us, it's usually the human interface elements to the OT systems that we're very concerned about.
Yeah, exactly. So you meant like so the OTs traditionally, they're not designed to sort of for regular updates, but I think
That's right.
there's more knowledge out there, and a vulnerability, once it's discovered, I just think you have the same sort of time frame as you used to remediate that vulnerability before an attacker finds it and actually try and attack you as an organization. So
That's a very good point.
the thing about attackers is, I think, they're very collaborative. Once somebody knows something, it's out there. They're much more collaborative than us, I think, as an
And they're very
enterprises.
innovative. I think,
They are. They are.
though
They're not on the
they're
same
they
constraints. Sorry. Yeah.
no, yeah, they're not under the same constraints. You're absolutely right. And it's a group of people that is quite intelligent. Now, maybe they're using their efforts depending on their reason for doing it in a misdirected manner, but it is a very intelligent group of people to be able to do some of these things that are being done. And we should never lose sight of that fact and dismiss them as average.
I mean, I think, I think hackers, I mean, you can, if you're a hacker, you can be a white hat and you can be a black hat, right? So
Yes.
I think they are, if we can sort of, try and bring them over to our side, they're actually fantastic in protecting your organization. And actually, we use hackers. We actually have it's still private. We've been running it for over a year. Private bug bounty program, and they actually tell us they provide a lot of information about our organization, our infrastructure, what's secure, what's not secure. So I think, yeah, hackers, if you can bring them over to the white side, are fantastic.
Now, talking about Black Hat, and again, getting back to you, you were a keynote speaker there on these human interface points that may be located all over the place and with different elements, is zero trust the best approach to securing it?
So zero trust, I think,
Or elements of zero trust, I should say.
yeah. So I think, and I think zero trust is fantastic. Is fantastic kind of a phrase of getting people's attention, but zero trust, I think you at some point you're going to have to trust somebody, right? You have to have some trust.
Otherwise you can't do anything.
Exactly. So you're going to have some trust. It's just the amount of, you try and, because nothing comes for free, right? If you're going to have if you have a control, it's going to, there's going to be overhead. There's going to be overhead of sorts. And if you have overhead that's relative to your audience, whether it's, people are going to find ways of doing it. I mean, we're regardless of how clever machines are, sometimes I think we are far, far cleverer. And I think it's, you just have to, I think that the key thing for a professional in cybersecurity is that you have to be quite pragmatic about, where your trust boundaries are. You want to sort of have it so that, if you are if there's a breach, the attack radius is sort of as minimized as possible, but not add so much overhead that people all of a sudden do shadow IT and then you have no visibility, and that's just every security professional's worst nightmare. So
I mean, we read it, you pick up a newspaper every day, or you open it on your iPad, as the case may be. There's not a single day that goes by where you can't find a story of some kind of a major breach event taking place with someone.
Yeah.
First of all, is there such a thing as let's just bust a myth here. Is there anything such as 100% security that you can stop everything and then?
No.
I'm recourse to this. What's the people think that we can spend a lot of money on this and we'll solve all our problems, but I think you just mentioned something about blast radius and limiting it. I'd like to gather your thoughts on this as to how this applies to what we're seeing in the day-to-day world on a daily basis here.
Yeah. So I think, you can't, for somebody who's very motivated, right? It's, and have limitless resources. I think they're, almost impossible to protect. And also the thing is we're in the light and they're in the dark. We don't know what they're actually doing, right? So if we have a bit more idea, and you can, some of the tools now can actually detect some of those signals, but you cannot, I think you cannot operate. I mean, the safest thing if you want 100% security is, I don't know, grab your server with your data, wrap it, put it in like 6 feet of concrete and, dump it in a hole and cover it by another 6 feet of concrete, right? It's completely not practical. So you just have to, it is, you do have, everything comes with a risk. I mean, it's not just cybersecurity, right? If somebody goes out, somebody might get hit by a bus, but it doesn't mean that, you calculate what that risk is and you sort of say, do I go out or do I stay in my house? So, everything comes with a risk, and you just have to sort of do enough so that it's as mitigated as possible. So when you're driving a car, you wear your seatbelt, you don't go speeding, you don't, drink. So you mitigate those as much as possible, but it's impossible to have something that's 100% secure, and it's not realistic. I also think it's not necessarily a fantastic kind of frame of mind to get into, because it scares people, right? It scares people, especially if they're not, if cybersecurity or security is not their kind of bread and butter, as it were. People go, well, we're at this point. and we've got to get to 100% secure. Whereas actually, no, it's a continuous process, and you just need to take a step at a time, and you just move from a very dark place to a lighter place. But it's like grades. It's not. It's shades of like grey, not like black and white. So I think getting that across and sort of getting people getting through the industry, our colleagues in industry, that's you just basically need to start taking steps in the right direction. And it doesn't matter if initially you don't get to where you want in the end, but as long as you keep moving, it's okay.
I'm so glad you said that, because that, Dr. Wendy, it'll bring, hopefully people listening are going to understand that. And that is it's shades. We're talking about levels of security. It's not a simple, you throw a switch and on day 0, you're not secure. Day 2, you're completely secure. It doesn't work that way. And I think one of the things you're describing is to do what you are suggesting, you have to have a consummate understanding of your risk and how much of it is acceptable. And how do you, I think there's a big gap. So I look at like the cybersecurity professionals, and I look at the executives that are actually running the business and who may not have that deep an interest in cybersecurity itself, because that's not what they're paid for. They have a business to go run and do whatever it is that business is doing in the market.
Profit and loss, right? Yeah. So they have those numbers.
They have. How do we bridge that gap? How do we get them an understanding of the risk, or should we turn it upside down and have them articulate what they believe are the riskiest parts to the business and secure that? So what direction do we go in here?
So I think obviously both directions better. So I have actually as part of my consulting career and my sort of last role with driving the DevSecOps initiative, Experian, I did interact with the board, and and there is a certain level of translation, I think, required for some
very polite term.
But it's I think that they do, incidentally, boards do have access to consultants, external experts as well. So they are, it's not like they're sitting in an ivory tower and say, we don't care, right? They honestly do. And they're talking about it. But I think it is I think the education is I think the main gap possibly, and that this is for every organization, it's not just, and every industry, is the person who's able to bridge someone who's like those who are highly technical, who understand how their system works or understand how their product works inside out. And gosh, I've seen some low level designs and it's just like, and your execs who basically says, well, what does this mean? What's the operational cost? How do we maintain this? How do we ensure that we are operating it within these regulations and safeguarding our customers and our stakeholders? So I think it's that interpreter, as it were, that is kind of quite crucial, so that you get sort of by-way flow. Because I think one of the things is when the sort of when what you're dealing with day to day is so different, it's sometimes difficult to get a message across. And that's regardless of what your industry is. So the thing is, they are, the execs, at least the ones I work with, they are interested. They do want to learn. It's just that how can the message be translated from the folks, who knows the system inside out to them.
That is one of the most important roles, and that's a very rare person.
That is because the thing is, it's just we're people, we're tribal. I mean, that's it. We're humans. That you can't get away from that. And we're most comfortable with people that are like us. So
Yes.
you need, for that translator, that person needs to be comfortable with speaking. Like you have to be able to get respect from both parties, right? So and be comfortable for both parties to speak to you and share information with you, for you to be able to play that interpreter role. So I think that's the difficulty.
Now, and I'm sure in all your many consulting adventures that you've probably had, there is you talked a little. You mentioned awareness, and this is just for me personally. I think building a culture of awareness is a very important step in an organization, right?
Yeah, and I
And
sort of,
there's a lot of friction there too. So how do you do it? Like, some thoughts on that?
so people are tribal. I think generally I think we're making progress, but I think one thing we have to, I can't remember where this came from, but I read something that somewhere where if you want to know that person, you need to sort of go back to the year they're 21, they turn 21 or something, right? So if you think about
Okay.
it, if you work backwards from that, people who are in executive positions or in senior roles who can make those decisions when they were 21, I mean, like system are, do you see what I mean? Like, system are, you physically have to go to the office to do any work. You can't work, connect from the comfort of your own home. So I think that there's that is that sort of education, understanding where they're from. And I think that empathy is quite important when you have those conversations with them, rather than go in and sort of go, you're not doing this right, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, right? So I think having that human element and sort of getting them to have an open dialogue with you would actually would help things a great deal.
You should put together a master class for something like this, and get because you're spot on, and it's a very difficult exercise to do for anyone that's gone through it and that's listening. When you actually get down to doing it, it is not a trivial thing to do. Um,
No, you have to bring people with you, which is probably one of the hardest thing.
that is the
Yeah.
hardest thing, right?
So,
You
yeah,
know, we
yeah,
get I can't tell you the number of times, and this is, again, I'm only speaking in our limited experience here of what we've seen, is that when you go to put a set of policies in place, security policies in place, if the organization has not been educated on the why, like if the
yeah,
broader audience, you tell them, well, don't connect from Starbucks to and do your banking there, as an example. I'm just picking
yeah,
something.
yeah,
And you don't then follow that up with why, then your compliance to it becomes it's a uphill fight. Whereas if they understand the why, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, people are reasonable and they're like, oh, that makes sense. Probably
yeah.
shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I mean, the actual writing the policy themselves is probably relatively easy, actually, because it's, there's certainly, if you're a certain organization in a certain industry, there are things that you have to do, and it's probably the same for every organization. But it's just getting that buy-in, getting that executive sponsorship, but also getting people on the on the coal face, as it were. So we understand why we're doing this, and we're going to do our best. And those are your best protectors, actually, as an organization, because they know the environment
Yeah.
inside out, because they know the technology, and because they are able to enact whatever's necessary to protect it. So I think it's that buy-in. The policy itself is a document. They're documents. It is what it is. But it's getting people to sort of come along with you on this journey, going, well, there's going to be a little bit more overhead. You're not going to be able to do things possibly as quickly, as easily as you did. But there's a reason for that. And I think is that having that is, I think, where the sort of cultural mindset change for sort of cybersecurity awareness program can help a great deal in an organization. And security champions. I mean, in DevSecOps, there's that is one way of bringing the sort of development team along that would help to improve the security posture of your organization.
Now, doesn't the development team, that's a great transition, DevSecOps, which you are a master of, is there's this inherent conflict present in that, right? Because this is a team that has to get an application out the door. It might have revenue implications. It might have compliance. It could have n number of implications for the company as a business. And you're introducing security overhead into it, or the developers will see it as, oh my God, now I got this security person
We gotta scan, we gotta do threat modeling. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you get across that barrier? I mean, that's a conflicting situation.
I think so. What, education works, but I think education, from my experience, you have to be for the developers, especially, it needs to be fairly directed education. And, going back to my sort of comment earlier that people are tribal, it really helps if you are, so security champions, they're basically developers, or ideally they're developers who with an interest in security. Okay. And, they understand, they have, because they have an interest in security, hopefully they have a better understanding why we're doing things. And it's having those individuals either within teams or, ideally they're within, that you don't move them around, but having those individuals to sort of communicate the why that you mentioned earlier, why we're doing things to the developers, that will kind of smooth that journey out. I think, modern day software development, you have to do, you have to do those security checks. You can't just, I sort of, here's my code, and it does what it says, and off you go, and we're never going to scan it. Even if it's secure, when you release it, you need to scan it continuously, and because new vulnerability can be discovered.
Oh, absolutely. But I see a lot of code today is not very rarely are things completely developed from scratch. You're borrowing libraries from somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Even if you're on Java is open source, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. It doesn't make sense to do it from scratch. Yeah, you don't write bespoke code at all. So, I mean, not at all, but like in general, for commercial software.
Yeah. Then controlling that third party risk is a very, from a security perspective, is there's a potential set of vulnerabilities there all the time.
And it's and you have to sort of new vulnerabilities are developed,
constantly,
in heartbeat, so that gets into, that sort of gets integrated, it's only discovered after you integrated the library into, Log4j into the application. So scanning those, if I was a software developer, or if I was an organization that does software development, I think scanning those open source libraries. So it's not just the vulnerabilities, you also have licenses. It's like, there are certain, even the open source, you can only use them under, potentially certain circumstances.
Right.
So I think in the past that there are instances where, basically the legal department, it gives them anxiety attacks. It's sort of like, are we using what we, how we're supposed to, and are we sort of in breach of any anything from the license compartment. So, but yeah, in like I think on average, something like from the top of my head, like 75 to 80% of all code lines are open source.
Really? I
Yeah,
didn't even
so
realize it was that high. Wow. So
yeah, so and yeah, so it's if you do need to do one kind of security sense check, I think scanning those open source libraries is sort of your main bet.
yeah, that's yeah. So then from that description, that process can never stop. It is continual.
No, no,
You
no, because new vulnerabilities get discovered, and if you have a library like for J, for example, that is commonly used, in different by different developers in the industry,
oh, it's
the impact of that is huge.
oh yeah. We had, I mean, in one of our own applications, we had Log4j. But the thing was that when we developed the app, we had developed it with security in mind. So for us to address it really didn't take very long to take care of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Whereas if we had not designed for security, we would have had architectural issues that would have come up with that when we addressed it.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you probably had from your like you had a good, a list of what libraries you have. So if any,
Yes.
if anything that comes up, like if you discover new vulnerabilities, you know exactly what's in your sort of asset register, like what you have, and then you
Yeah,
can
that's step
reduce.
one.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people don't even have that. I think, especially some of the, yeah, possibly where connectivity wasn't such an issue. So I think having that is quite crucial, and I think we are moving the right direction. Right, people are aware that we need to have these things. People are aware that we should do like threat profiling. People are aware. It's least privilege. Access control. So we are getting there. We are getting there.
Kicking and screaming in some cases, but yes,
Kicking and
the
screaming in
trend,
some cases, but yeah,
we're trending in the right way.
we
Well,
are trending in the
Dr.
right way. And I think, I probably shouldn't say this, but I, I think the fact that it's always another opportunity, to sort of help and improve and, hopefully sort of pull someone along, kicking, screaming, shouting, what have you. I think that's what makes the role kind of quite, so interesting. It's never the same. Like every day is different.
That's very true. That's true in consulting in general. It's never, no 2 days are exactly the same. Well, Dr. Wendy, we're already at the hour here pretty much. So I wanted to make sure that we gave you a little bit of time to plug anything that you wanted to talk about and bring to our audience's attention. We know you're very active in the security community. You make a lot of appearances. So are there any books, appearances, blogs, literature, anything that you're publishing? What would you like our audience to know about?
So I do have a blog. I've been writing blogs since 2016. So it's my way of giving back to the community and just sharing some of the lessons learned and some of the things I've seen on the ground. I try to depends on scheduling. I try to sort of keep that up as a sort of bi-monthly occurrence.
Excellent.
The next conference that I'm going to be physically at is at CISAT in Paris. So
Oh,
I will be
wonderful.
presenting. So that's a cybersecurity conference for space. It's in the space sector. So that's the next one. I think that's in April. But no, in terms of, I do my best to try and give back to society, to the community, and to just bring, just bring people along a little bit. So it's a good
That's
position to be in.
admirable. And we all deeply appreciate it, because there's a lot of people that otherwise could never get access to your knowledge. And it's a little bit of sharing goes a long way.
More than always happy to help, always happy to help. And yeah, and if the audience have any sort of questions, I can't promise that I will reply promptly, but yeah, if there's anything I can help with, just let me know. We're a community. I learn from somebody.
We absolutely
when I started
will.
Yeah, so brilliant. Thank you.
We're all learning every day. And I don't think I've even scratched the surface in terms of knowledge. So,
and it changes, right? The industry changes. So I think, there's the constant learning, which is sort of, if you're a geek, is fantastic.
Yeah. And on that note, geeks, I think
just in case.
We'll let. Well, we deeply appreciate you being here, and don't be a stranger. And next time you have a major announcement, let us know. We'd love to get you back and chat about it.
Look forward to it. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.